friends. Thank you for that joyful start. I was so nervous, and then I forgot for a second that I had to come up and speak, so it helped me. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I'm so happy to be with you all and to share on this topic, which actually, I think in a way, I'll share some thoughts about it, but I think this has been one of the themes that has been running through all of the different themes that we've been speaking about. You know, when we're thinking about vibrant communities or the vision of Baha'u'llah, all of these things are, you know, so close actually to the same work which the Institute helps us to carry out. So really the first thing that I wanted to do, if we could just go to the next slide, was to create an invitation for us actually all to think a little bit about the reality of our society together. This is one of the things we're often doing in the Institute, or that we're seeing in the messages of the Universal House of Justice, is to think a little bit about our reality. Maybe it's our community, maybe it's the nature of our society at large. And you know, we're a large group, but maybe we can continue this kind of reflection and conversation in our breakout groups. So really, in order to think about reading reality, I wanted to kind of bring up this question of how education is treated in our society today. So I have a few maybe reflections to offer and encourage you to also consider your own reflections on this topic. So, you know, I went to school in Canada, so many of my reflections are from Canada's school system. And, you know, here in Canada, we have the bounty of having education, schooling for all children to be able to participate. They can attend kindergarten upwards until high school, and this is something that we all have access to. When we consider the world at large, we know that that's not always the case. Sometimes, you know, financial means are required to attend schooling, or perhaps certain populations are prioritized under those circumstances where boys might be offered priority over girls or other certain groups. When we think a little bit about the education system here in Canada, and kind of maybe generally in the West, we could say, there is often a tendency to think about students or children as kind of these empty cups that are, you know, ready to be filled with information from an individual who knows more. And while we can also recognize that teachers have much to offer our community and have much experience, at the same time, our posture of teaching and education might be different if we're approaching it in that way, that these students don't have any existing knowledge or existing capacity. The other thing that I had noted, you know, just in reflecting on with some, you know, of the older generations who also raised me, was the difference when we see actually, you know, spirituality existing as part of the education system. You know, historically, maybe even a simple prayer was, you know, offered historically, whereas when I went to school, that really wasn't the case. It became very secular. But I did note actually later in my life, they began to try to add, you know, character building or morality, which certainly has its benefits. Certainly in kindergarten, you know, sharing these kinds of things are encouraged by many teachers in our system. But then noting actually when these things are separated from God and religion, that there are some problems and confusion that does begin to arise among children and students. And then, you know, thinking into the older grades, I was just reflecting how much of our focus is ultimately on assisting people to engage in work and to build a livelihood, which of course is praiseworthy. But at times there's very much an individual focus on, you know, I need to support my family or myself. And then of course, you know, once we're in that situation where we're able to support ourselves, education often stops at that point, that actually we don't continue, we're in that kind of pattern of life. So, you know, I was just thinking about some of these reflections, and then, you know, had the opportunity to look towards the writings of the Baha'i faith and how education is elevated and expanded in these writings. So, if we could go to the next slide, I have a quotation here to read. That the most urgent requirement is the promotion of education. It is inconceivable that any nation should achieve prosperity and success unless this paramount, this fundamental concern is carried forward. So, clearly there is a great deal of value of education, even within our current society. It's really fundamental to, as Abdul Baha is describing here, the foundation of a nation or society as a whole. And that began to, help me think, if it's important for the nation or society, it must also be important for the community, for the family, for the individual, all these different levels that, begin to support the building of our society. If you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, just one before. There we go, thank you. The second quotation, we've heard this, I think, a few times this conference, that it's ringing true in many hearts at this time, which is, regard man as a mine, rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So this, this speaks a little bit to my thoughts about the idea of an empty cup, that, a mine, this kind of description and analogy helps us to think about education in a different way. Certainly there's a great deal of effort. A mine is not you walk in and you pick up a beautifully polished gem. It requires a great deal of effort to search, to unearth these gems. But that, there's also something to the environment that's created around and how it's treated when we know that that gem is there and ready to be polished with some effort and support. And I have one more quotation on the next slide. Baha'u'llah considered education as one of the most fundamental factors of a true civilization. This education, however, in order to be adequate and fruitful, should be comprehensive in nature and should take into consideration not only the physical and the intellectual side of man, but also his spiritual and ethical aspects. So here we're seeing education as both material and spiritual. This is, I think, another ongoing theme that we're seeing in the materials and discussions that we've been having, that it's so key to consider these together, and how often actually spiritual education might guide our efforts of material advancement, direct it in a way in which that's most useful in order to build civilization. And here I think there are also, when we think about civilization, we can look historically and think, there have been civilizations that have risen and fallen. That is certainly something that has existed in our history, but there is this idea of an ever-advancing civilization, one that continues to build on itself. And for that, I think there are some implications about our education, that our education would likewise be continual and progressive, and would not end at one time. So, to me, when I look at these few quotations, I think we can see that education also has a greater purpose, not only just for the individual alone as well, that it's really for service, for building up of a new civilization, but then we can see within that system this twofold purpose, that we both, contribute to the building of this civilization, and through this work, we also develop ourselves as individuals. So we can see maybe from, the state of the educational system right now that really, and then comparing it to this vision of Baha'u'llah, that there really is a fundamental need for an education system that meets this vision. One that considers the development of civilization in all its parts, both material and spiritual, not segregating these. And one that can support at actually many levels, that supports the individual, the family, the neighborhood, the community, society, and so on. And when we consider all of these parts, as particularly this last quotation about the building of civilization, we might think, oh, how is my role in education going to reach such a lofty height? When we consider how we can each contribute to our communities, our families, and these things, we can see how we might be able to take part in such a lofty enterprise. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we actually have been blessed with another system of education, which I think you probably saw that I was moving towards in my discussion. This is the Training Institute. This is a system of distance education that exists, and that really the purpose seeks to fuel and facilitate this evolving conversation of seeing the writings of the Baha'i faith and translating them into reality for the purpose of the betterment of society. So really the system has three main parts: the materials, so these series of courses that are of course grounded in the Baha'i writings, a study circle, a group of friends, new or old, kind of advancing together in discussion and also along a path of service together. And the tutor, who really is just a more experienced friend who supports by creating an environment where all the friends are seen as protagonists, and they can support the progress of each participant along their path. If you could go to the next slide, please. This one I didn't write down, I have to read it here. The Training Institute has no parallel as an instrument for the systematic exposure of limitless numbers of souls to the life-giving waters of the revelation and the inexhaustible meaning of the Word of God. So this was in one of the most recent messages, the 30 December message of the Universal House of Justice, that really seeing that participating in these courses of the Training Institute supports us to become engaged more and more in the life of the community and helps us to build the knowledge, skills, and insights to be able to contribute to the development of our communities and beyond, and really actually beyond that even, to this idea, which was introduced in this message, that we might expand our vision to consider the building of a new society, the society building powers that the Institute process can begin to take shape with. So, and some of this many of us may know, but sometimes it's helpful to hear it described all together, that participating in the courses of the Training Institute, we can see it as a seamless and coherent experience from the age of 5, beyond, essentially, that there are, there's children's classes, supporting families and children to be able to build strong moral structures, and also to support the rise in resources to provide education for children. The Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program for those approximately 11 to 14, sometimes 12 to 15, is described as an age group which really has an acute sense of justice, eagerness to learn about the world, and really a strong commitment to contribute to society. And then those for 15 older, of course, there's the study of the main sequence of courses, the Training Institute, which offers a space for friends to become active agents of their own learning and study the Baha'i writings and walk along a path of service. So, this is kind of that general description of the Training Institute, and I was so happy to hear Bronwyn share that beautiful experience of the expanding nucleus this morning. It was described really helpful as a way that we could begin to see how this pattern of life could expand to many more individuals. But I also wanted to share maybe a few stories that would, or really just glimpses or glimmerings of how the Institute process has engaged in this broader vision of building a new society, where we begin to see how these writings of Baha'u'llah and of the Baha'i faith can begin to change the culture in which we're living. The patterns of life begin to evolve into something new. So I'm reminded of some stories. I'm sharing a little bit broadly here, but I've heard many experiences from friends in India, actually, that, friends who have visited there, and hearing the description of, in many places in India, there's a caste system exists, where certain castes are, there's almost like a categorization of people for anyone who's not familiar, and actually interaction, particularly with someone who's considered of a higher status with someone who's of a lower status, is actually, it's not considered appropriate. And here in come these institute activities where all are welcome to participate and engage together, and how that was quite a barrier actually for these friends to participate. And, time after time, really just loving patience has brought friends together that actually now we see, even this idea of serving food to someone else or sharing in something collectively was very foreign and very strange. And then starting to see actually these things quite dissipate quite a bit. I also wanted to just read actually from the Institute itself. I thought it would be most appropriate to share. This is from book 13, which talks about social action, that there's actually many narratives. It describes it it's stories of friends in a meeting sharing a little bit about how the Institute has begun to affect the structures and the systems of society that they're seeing. So I'm just reading from this part where one cluster coordinator for the main sequence of courses was sharing, in study circles held with adults, the participants often have difficulty reading. So it is not uncommon for simple literacy courses to emerge in parallel as the friends go slowly through the books. Some have found that using the text of the junior youth program for this purpose is quite effective. So I think we've seen that actually in many examples, how literacy can, be connected with the Institute, and particularly maybe with parents. I've been hearing about that as well. Actually, even on the flip side, I've been hearing about a neighborhood in Brampton, Ontario, where the friends, the children have begun to learn actually a lot of English, like they had become and had been speaking a lot of Punjabi. That's what their parents had known, but they're starting to get to an age and they're starting to have enough children that are becoming very fluent in English that actually they wanted to have Punjabi classes to ensure that their children can maintain that language as well. So I thought that was also a very beautiful way to ensure that families are supported and the concerns are continuing to be addressed. I'll share just one more from here, which is after prayers in our home, shares a participant from a neighborhood in the town that they're meeting in. We would always read from the writings and reflect as a family on how we're contributing to the community building process. Then we decided a couple of years ago to have a weekly devotional meeting in our home, and some of the older children in our family invited their friends to attend. Now, we happen to have a generator that we use to produce electricity to our part of the neighborhood for a small fee to each household. Last year, it became clear that the revenue we received would no longer cover the cost of the fuel. One day, after prayers, we presented the situation to everyone there. Someone suggested that we run the generator on palm oil, which is much less expensive than petrol. However, for the palm oil to be used in the generator, it needed to be processed first. The older girls in the family and a few of their friends attending the devotional meeting offered to take on responsibility for preparing the oil every evening for the next day. The money saved in this way went towards the school fees of the children from several different families. And over time, with the accumulated savings, it was possible to build a simple structure for a neighborhood preschool. So we can see these spaces that come together are also community spaces to begin to think about the needs and to build new possibilities that can happen in these places. So just a few glimpses of the power of the Institute for the society building power of the faith.